Of course I'll do it. You're my sister. This is what sisters do for each other. I will help you to carry the child.
Jessica, how could you do this to me? So you want to destroy my home? I trusted you so much.
Jessica, I love you so much. I can't wait to have you as my legally married wife.
Oh, likewise me. Honestly, I can't wait.
She carried her best friend's baby in her womb, but by the time that baby was born, she had already stolen the woman's husband, her house, and her entire life. This is the story of Sarah Harmon, the woman who trusted the wrong person with the one thing she wanted more than anything else in the world, a child. Before we start, if you believe in loyalty, if you believe that the people closest to you should be the ones you trust the most, then stay with me until the end of this video, because what happened to Sarah Harmon will make you question every friendship you have ever had. This is a true-to-life story inspired by real events, told to protect the privacy of those involved. If stories like this speak to you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because we post new stories like this every single day. Now, let's dive into action. Sarah Harmon grew up in a small town outside of Charleston, South Carolina, in a modest brick house with a wraparound porch and a mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. She met Jessica Marsh in the 3rd grade, when Jessica moved to town after her parents' divorce, and from that day forward, the 2 girls were inseparable. They rode bikes together down Magnolia Street, they shared lockers in middle school, they cried on each other's shoulders through breakups, through the death of Sarah's father, through every hard season a girl could go through growing up in the South. By the time they graduated high school, everyone in town knew them as a package deal. Sarah and Jessica, Jessica and Sarah. Where you saw one, you saw the other. But life has a way of pulling people down different roads, even when they swear they'll never drift apart. Sarah went on to study business at the University of South Carolina, while Jessica stayed behind, working retail jobs and drifting from one relationship to the next. They still called each other every week. They still showed up for each other's birthdays. But the distance between their lives began to grow, even if neither of them wanted to admit it. It was during her junior year of college that Sarah met Michael Harmon. Michael was 10 years older than Sarah, the son of a real estate developer who had built half the shopping centers in the greater Charleston area. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wear his money like a costume. He drove a pickup truck instead of a sports car, and he volunteered every other weekend at a food bank downtown. But everyone who met him knew that behind that humble exterior was a man worth tens of millions of dollars, set to inherit his father's entire empire. Michael fell for Sarah the moment he saw her arguing with a barista about a mistake on her coffee order, laughing about it instead of getting angry, turning the whole situation into a joke that had the whole coffee shop smiling. He asked her to dinner that same afternoon. She said yes, mostly because she thought a man who dressed like he did surely couldn't afford a nice restaurant, and she wanted to see how he'd handle the embarrassment. Instead, he took her to a quiet little place by the water, out on Shem Creek, and by the end of the night, she found herself unable to stop thinking about him. They dated for 2 years before Michael proposed, down on one knee on that very same dock where they'd had their first date, the sun setting behind him over the marsh grass. Sarah said yes before he even finished the question. Jessica was her maid of honor. She gave a toast at the reception that had the entire room in tears, talking about the little girl from Magnolia Street who used to dream about a fairy tale and how she'd finally found her prince. Nobody in that room could have imagined what Jessica Marsh would eventually do to her best friend. The first 2 years of marriage were, by every account, wonderful. Michael and Sarah bought a beautiful home in Mount Pleasant, just across the bridge from downtown Charleston, with a view of the water and a garden Sarah spent her weekends tending to. Michael's father passed away 18 months into the marriage, and Michael inherited the family business in full, a portfolio of commercial properties, shopping plazas, and undeveloped land worth well over $60 million. He could have changed. Men with that kind of money often do. But Michael stayed the same steady, humble man Sarah had fallen in love with. He still drove that same old truck for another year before Sarah finally convinced him to upgrade it. The one thing missing from their life together was a child. Sarah had always wanted to be a mother. Even as a little girl, she used to talk about how many kids she wanted, what she'd name them, how she'd raise them differently than she'd been raised. So when she and Michael began trying for a baby in their 3rd year of marriage, She was overjoyed at the thought of finally starting that chapter of her life. But month after month, nothing happened. After a year of trying without success, Sarah went to see a specialist in Charleston, a fertility doctor named Dr. Patricia Owens, who ran a battery of tests and eventually delivered news that shattered Sarah's world. Sarah had a condition called premature ovarian insufficiency, worsened by severe endometriosis that had gone undiagnosed for years. Her chances of conceiving naturally were extremely low, and even with medical intervention, doctors gave her less than a 15% chance of ever carrying a healthy pregnancy to term. Sarah cried for weeks. She blamed herself, even though there was nothing she could have done differently. She worried that Michael would leave her, that a man with his wealth and options would eventually want a wife who could give him children the traditional way. But Michael surprised her. He held her through every difficult night, and he told her, again and again, that she was the only woman he had ever wanted, with or without children. He told her they would figure it out together, whatever that meant, whether it was adoption, surrogacy, or simply the two of them and their marriage, just as it was. It was Sarah who eventually brought up the idea of surrogacy, after months of research and long conversations with Dr. Owens. Using Sarah's eggs and Michael's sperm through in vitro fertilization, a healthy surrogate could carry their biological child. The problem was finding the right person, someone they could trust completely, someone who wouldn't disappear after the pregnancy, someone who understood what this child would mean to them. Sarah didn't have to think long before Jessica's face came to mind. The two women had remained close over the years, even as their lives took different paths. Jessica had never married. She drifted between jobs as a hairdresser and a part-time bartender, living in a rented apartment on the outskirts of town, always one paycheck away from trouble. She used to joke, half seriously, that she was destined to be the fun aunt instead of a mother herself, that her body was built for other things besides pregnancy. When Sarah brought up the idea over dinner one night, carefully, nervously, almost afraid to ask, Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and she grabbed Sarah's hands across the table. "Of course I'll do it," Jessica said. "You're my sister. This is what sisters do for each other." What Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Jessica had been quietly resentful of her best friend's life for years. She had watched Sarah marry into extraordinary wealth, while she herself struggled to make rent. She had smiled through birthday parties at that beautiful house in Mount Pleasant, while going home to a cramped apartment with a leaking faucet the landlord refused to fix. She had told herself for years that she was happy for Sarah, that jealousy was an ugly emotion unbecoming of a good friend. But somewhere along the way, that resentment had calcified into something darker, something Jessica herself might not have fully admitted, even to herself, until the opportunity presented itself. Sarah and Michael paid for everything. The legal contracts, drawn up by a top family law attorney in Charleston. The medical procedures, a generous compensation package for Jessica that would have taken her years to earn on her own, $120,000, along with a brand new car and a fully paid apartment for the duration of the pregnancy, so she wouldn't have to work while carrying the baby. Sarah wanted Jessica to have absolutely nothing to worry about. She wanted her best friend to feel loved and appreciated for the enormous gift she was giving them. The embryo transfer was successful on the second attempt. Jessica was pregnant with Sarah and Michael's biological daughter. At first, everything seemed like a dream come true. Sarah threw herself into preparing for the baby, decorating a nursery in soft yellows and creams, reading every parenting book she could find, attending every prenatal appointment alongside Jessica. Michael, too, was overjoyed, often driving Jessica to her appointments himself when Sarah had work obligations, wanting to be involved in every step of the process that would finally make him a father. It was during those long drives, those quiet waiting room conversations, those moments when Sarah wasn't present, that something began to shift. Jessica later admitted, though only much later, that she hadn't set out with a plan to seduce Michael. It happened gradually, she claimed, the way these things often do. A joke shared in the car, a conversation about music they both loved. Michael, worried and anxious about the pregnancy, confiding in Jessica about fears he didn't want to burden Sarah with, fears about being a good father, about the family business, about pressures Sarah, wrapped up in her own emotional journey with infertility, hadn't had the bandwidth to hear. Jessica listened. Jessica made him laugh. Jessica made him feel understood in a way that, in those specific months, Sarah simply couldn't, distracted as she was by her own grief and hope tangled together. By the 5th month of the pregnancy, Michael and Jessica had begun a secret relationship. They were careful, frighteningly careful. Jessica would tell Sarah she needed extra rest and couldn't have visitors on certain days, when in reality Michael would be there instead. They exchanged messages on a separate phone Jessica kept hidden in her nightstand drawer. Michael began finding excuses to work late, to take business trips that somehow always aligned with moments Jessica needed a ride or a check-in. Sarah, trusting her husband completely and grateful beyond words to her best friend, never once suspected a thing. Why would she? These were the two people she trusted most in the entire world. The affair continued in secret for the final 4 months of the pregnancy. Jessica gave birth to a healthy baby girl in a hospital in Charleston, and Sarah was in the delivery room, sobbing with joy as she held her daughter for the very first time. They named her Grace Harmon. Sarah remembers that day as the happiest of her entire life, and it breaks her heart now to know that even in that moment, the two people beside her hospital bed were already planning a future without her in it. Jessica stayed involved in the baby's life over the following months, as had always been the plan. She was, after all, family, practically an aunt to little Grace. Sarah welcomed this closeness, grateful that her daughter would grow up surrounded by so much love. She had no idea that every visit Jessica made to the house, every babysitting favor she offered, so Sarah could catch up on sleep, was another opportunity for her and Michael to continue their affair right under Sarah's own roof. It was nearly a year after Grace's birth that Sarah finally began to suspect something was wrong. Michael had grown distant, working later hours, becoming irritable when Sarah asked simple questions about his day. He stopped initiating affection the way he used to. He seemed to flinch whenever Sarah brought up plans for their future, a family vacation, a 5th wedding anniversary trip they'd been talking about for months. Sarah told herself it was stress from the business. She told herself new parenthood was hard on every marriage. She had no reason to suspect the truth, because the truth was almost too monstrous to imagine. The unraveling began on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Sarah had taken Grace to Jessica's apartment to drop off a bag of outgrown baby clothes, planning to surprise her friend since Jessica hadn't been returning texts all day. When Sarah knocked and got no answer, she used the spare key Jessica had given her years ago for emergencies, worried something might have happened to her friend. Instead, she found her husband's truck keys sitting on Jessica's kitchen counter, right next to his wallet. Sarah stood frozen in that doorway for what felt like an eternity, her daughter on her hip, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were telling her. She heard voices from the bedroom down the hall. She heard her husband's voice, low and affectionate, saying words to another woman that Sarah hadn't heard him say to her in months. She didn't scream. She didn't confront them in that moment. Something in her, some instinct for self-preservation, told her to leave quietly, to gather proof, to understand the full scope of what she was dealing with before she reacted. She drove home in silence, put her daughter to bed, and sat alone in the dark of her living room, until Michael came home 3 hours later, with a flimsy excuse about a business dinner that ran long. Over the following 2 weeks, Sarah hired a private investigator, a decision that felt surreal, like something out of a movie rather than her own life. What that investigator uncovered destroyed whatever remained of Sarah's trust in the two people she had loved most. Michael and Jessica had been carrying on their affair for well over a year. There were hotel receipts, there were text messages recovered from Michael's old phone, which he'd foolishly failed to fully wipe before upgrading devices. There was even a joint bank account Michael had quietly opened in Jessica's name, into which he had been depositing money for months, far beyond the surrogacy compensation they had originally agreed upon. But the most devastating discovery of all was still to come. Sarah's attorney uncovered that Michael had, 6 months prior, begun the process of restructuring his assets, moving significant portions of the family business into a trust that named Jessica, not Sarah, as a primary beneficiary. He had also quietly changed the beneficiary on several of his life insurance policies. It appeared, based on the timeline the investigator pieced together, that Michael and Jessica had been planning, whether fully or partially, to eventually push Sarah out of the marriage entirely, positioning Jessica to inherit not just Michael's heart, but a substantial portion of his fortune. Sarah confronted them both on a Sunday afternoon at the house in Mount Pleasant, with her own attorney present and, unbeknownst to Michael, a recording device running. She laid every piece of evidence on the dining room table, where the three of them had shared countless meals together over the years. She watched her husband's face go pale. She watched Jessica, the girl she had known since the 3rd grade, the woman who had carried her own biological daughter in her womb, break down into tears that Sarah, even in that moment of profound betrayal, couldn't tell were genuine remorse or simply the panic of getting caught. "How could you do this to me?" Sarah asked them both, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I trusted you with everything. I trusted you with my husband. I trusted you with my child." Michael tried to explain, tried to frame it as something that had simply happened, something neither of them intended, something about feeling disconnected from Sarah during the hardest chapter of their marriage. Jessica said almost nothing at all, staring down at the table, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. Sarah filed for divorce the following week. What came next was a legal battle that stretched on for over a year, complicated significantly by the unusual circumstances of Grace's birth. Because Jessica was the biological gestational carrier, and because certain aspects of the original surrogacy contract had loopholes that Michael's own family attorney had exploited on his behalf, Jessica initially attempted to claim parental rights to Grace, hoping to remain permanently entangled in the Harmon family and fortune. It was a grueling, heartbreaking fight, one that required Sarah to prove through DNA testing and the original embryo transfer documentation that Grace was her biological daughter, in every sense of the word, conceived from her own egg, carried only through Jessica's body as a service Sarah and Michael had paid for in full. The court ultimately ruled decisively in Sarah's favor. Jessica's claim to parental rights was dismissed entirely, and the original surrogacy contract was upheld in full, meaning Jessica had no legal standing whatsoever regarding custody of Grace. Sarah was awarded full custody of her daughter. The financial settlement, too, worked out very differently than Michael and Jessica had likely hoped. Sarah's attorney successfully argued that the attempted asset restructuring Michael had engaged in during the affair constituted an attempt at fraudulent transfer, designed to shield marital assets in anticipation of divorce. South Carolina courts do not look kindly on this kind of maneuvering, particularly when there is clear evidence, as there was in Sarah's case, of infidelity coinciding with covert financial restructuring. The court awarded Sarah a substantial settlement, including the house in Mount Pleasant, and a significant portion of the family business's value, along with generous child support and alimony, given the length of the marriage and Michael's clear financial misconduct. Jessica, for her part, lost almost everything. Michael, it turned out, had never actually married her, and once the legal dust settled and his fortune was significantly diminished by the divorce settlement, his interest in continuing the relationship evaporated as quickly as it had begun. Word spread through their small Charleston social circle about what had happened, and Jessica found herself shunned by nearly everyone who had once considered her a friend. She eventually moved out of state entirely, starting over somewhere new, though Sarah has heard, secondhand, that her old friend has struggled considerably since everything fell apart. Michael, too, faced consequences beyond the financial settlement. His father's old business partners, disturbed by the scandal and the ethical questions it raised about his judgment, gradually distanced themselves from working with him. Several key commercial contracts were not renewed. His reputation in the tight-knit Charleston business community, built over decades by his father before him, took a significant hit that no amount of money could fully repair. Sarah, meanwhile, rebuilt her life with a strength that surprised even herself. She kept the house in Mount Pleasant, filling it with new memories instead of old ghosts, repainting the nursery, turning Michael's old home office into a bright reading nook for herself and Grace. She returned to work, eventually starting her own small business consulting firm, using the skills she'd developed during her years, helping manage the family's commercial properties. Grace is now 5 years old, a bright, joyful little girl who has no memory of the betrayal that surrounded her arrival into the world. And Sarah has made it her life's mission to give her daughter a childhood full of honesty and unconditional love. As for Michael, he reached out to Sarah nearly 2 years after the divorce was finalized, asking for forgiveness, hoping perhaps for some kind of reconciliation now that his relationship with Jessica had long since ended. Sarah agreed to let him remain in Grace's life as her father, believing firmly that children deserve relationships with both parents whenever safely possible. But she has never allowed him back into her personal life in any other capacity. She built new boundaries, firm and unshakable, and she has stuck to them ever since. Now let's talk about what this story really teaches us, because there are some powerful lessons here for anyone listening. The first lesson is this: trust is not the same thing as blindness. Sarah trusted her husband and her best friend completely, and for most of her life, that trust had been well earned. But even the deepest trust needs occasional reality checks, especially during major life transitions like fertility struggles, financial windfalls, or extended close contact between a spouse and another person, even a person you consider family. This isn't about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone around you. It's about staying emotionally present in your own marriage, communicating openly even when things are hard, and paying attention when a partner starts pulling away. The second lesson is about the danger of unspoken resentment. Jessica carried years of quiet jealousy toward her best friend's life, jealousy she likely never fully acknowledged or addressed, even to herself. Left unspoken and unresolved, that resentment eventually curdled into something that allowed her to justify an enormous betrayal. If you find yourself feeling envious of a friend's life, their marriage, their money, their opportunities, it's worth examining those feelings honestly rather than burying them, because buried resentment has a way of resurfacing in destructive ways. The third lesson, and perhaps the most important one, is about protecting yourself legally in any situation involving significant financial or family complexity, whether that's surrogacy, prenuptial agreements, or business partnerships. Sarah's foresight in insisting on detailed legal contracts around the surrogacy, even though it felt uncomfortable to formalize something so personal with her best friend, is ultimately what protected her daughter's custody and her financial future. If you are ever entering into an arrangement involving children, money, or long-term commitments with anyone, even someone you deeply trust, get everything in writing and don't be afraid to consult an attorney. Love and trust are wonderful things, but they don't hold up in family court the way a well-drafted legal document does. And finally, if you are currently going through infertility, a difficult marriage, or a betrayal of your own, please know that your worth is not tied to what someone else chose to do. Sarah didn't do anything wrong. She loved generously, she trusted the people closest to her, and she was still betrayed in one of the most painful ways imaginable. But she rebuilt her life, stronger and wiser, and she is raising her daughter in a home filled with far more honesty and peace than the one she started out in. If you're going through something similar right now, please know that healing is possible, and that the people who betrayed you do not get the final word in your story. If this story moved you, if it made you think about trust, friendship, or the strength it takes to rebuild your life after betrayal, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. We share stories like Sarah's every single week, real stories about resilience, betrayal, and the strength of the human spirit. Drop a comment below and let us know what part of this story affected you the most, and share this video with someone in your life who needs a reminder that they can survive anything life throws at them. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.
Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and support me. Thank you so much. I love you all. Bye!